Hey guys, welcome back to Flipped Psychology. I'm Miss Lee, and we are starting Unit 4, Lifespan Development. We're going to be covering Section 1, Infancy and Childhood. We have quite a few objectives to cover, so if you want to pause here and review, go ahead and do that now. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and let's get started. Okay, so let's talk about why we would even want to study development. What is the point and why is it important? So there are a lot of theories out there that early childhood experiences continue to affect us as we get older and become adolescents or adults. We also want to learn about developmental problems, what causes them, and more importantly, how we can treat them. And we also finally just have a curiosity about how people change over time. The ways that we study development should be review for you. First of all, we've got cross-sectional studies. These are comparisons made of behavior or abilities of two or more different groups of children, with each group covering a different age range. These are handy because you can do the entire study all at once and you don't have to wait for the children to grow up. Longitudinal studies study a group of children, and these children are followed over time. This could be a relatively short period of time, or in some cases it could be for decades. And finally, we use case studies. This is one or a very small number of children, and they're seen regularly over a period of time. The time period is variable, but it's usually 6 months or more in length, and usually what we're looking for is situations that are out of the ordinary. So the problem with case studies is that they are not generalizable to the population, but in these cases, usually that doesn't matter because we're trying to gain information about these extreme cases. In this unit, there are quite a few theories about development, and we will be looking through several lenses. The first one that we look through, and you've heard this term before, nature versus nurture. This is a debate that is a long-standing debate in psychology. This is heredity versus environmental influences. What our genetics say about us versus what our surroundings say about us or our upbringing. Some psychologists believe that biological factors play a greater role in development, and others contend that the environmental factors are most important. And we also talk about how we develop, whether it's in a continuous line or through stages. So when we talk about stages, those are like a step in a staircase or a ladder versus kind of like a ramp, a continuous, more gradual development over time. So during this unit, it's important to continue to ask yourself what factors are actually influencing human behavior and how does development occur. So we're looking at nature and nurture as well as stages and continuity. All right, so let's talk about prenatal development. This is a time of remarkable change that helps set the stage for future psychological development. The very most dramatic gains in height and weight occur before birth, and the brain develops over the course of the prenatal period. It will continue to go through more changes during the early years of childhood. So when we're talking about prenatal development, there are three main stages that we take into account. There's the germinal stage, and this is the first 2 weeks after conception. The embryonic stage, this is typically the 3rd through the 8th week, and then the fetal stage, this is the 9th week until birth. And on your screen, you see some typical pictures of development, both of a pregnant woman as well as the human embryo. We will go through each of these stages to give you a little bit more detail. So again, the germinal stage lasts about 2 weeks. It begins at conception when the sperm and the egg unite in one of the two fallopian tubes. The fertilized egg is called a zygote. The cells continue to divide into two every day as it travels through the fallopian tube. 5 days after fertilization, it is now referred to as a blastocyst. So how things actually form at the very, very beginning, a cavity or like an emptiness forms inside, and it's inside this cavity or this opening that a baby's body will eventually form. The protective outer membrane breaks down, and this enables it to enter the uterus from the fallopian tube. This is where it will hopefully implant and continue to grow and develop throughout the course of the pregnancy. The embryonic stage is marked by very rapid growth, and over time it starts to look less like a ball of cells and more like a baby. About 4 weeks after conception, the neural tube forms. This is super important. We've already studied the nervous system, and this is going to set the stage for what we already know about the nervous system to develop. This tube does later develop into the nervous system, including the spinal cord and the brain. The tube begins to close and the brain vesicles form. These vesicles eventually develop into parts of the brain, including the structures of the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So again, take a look at these pictures and see this incredible development that happens just over the period of 3 days. It's really pretty amazing. During the fetal stage, the final stage, this starts about 8 or 9 weeks after fertilization, and the majority of growth happens in these later stages of fetal development. The embryo at this point has developed to such an extent that the body's major organs, like the brain, the liver, and the kidneys, are able to form. Months 4 through 6, the heartbeat grows stronger and other body systems become further developed. Fingernails, hair, eyelashes, and toenails form. Around 28 weeks, the brain starts to mature much faster, and it starts to have activity that resembles a newborn. During this time, the fetus increases about 6 times its size, and it's going to be called a fetus until it's born. At that point, it becomes a newborn. So you may want to pause here and take a look at some of these pictures. So let's talk about some prenatal influences. This is anything that can change the development during the prenatal stages of pregnancy. And they include the health and age of the mother. They include just developmental processes that sometimes don't go exactly as we hope or plan. And then one of the biggest problems that we see is from teratogens. This is really any chemical or any outside influence that doesn't happen in the normal course of a pregnancy. So it can include infectious agents like rubella or another kind of disease. It can include physical agents. This could be anything that is ionizing or maybe hypothermia. This could be maternal health factors like diabetes in the mother, environmental chemicals like mercury, herbicides, industrial solvents, and then drugs. These are prescription, over-the-counter, or recreational drugs. And these chemicals can have a profound influence on how the baby is going to form in the womb. One of the most common group of abnormalities is fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS. And this is when babies are born to mothers who consume alcohol during their pregnancy. It is the most common known non-genetic or non-inherited cause of intellectual disability in the United States. I hope you'll pause here and take a look at the fetal development chart, because it shows you what are some common developmental issues that happen if the mother consumes alcohol during specific times in her pregnancy. Some of the effects of fetal alcohol syndrome include very specific facial characteristics. So this is including smaller eye openings, a smooth philtrum, which is this area right here, and a very thin upper lip. A couple of concepts that you need to know in this unit regarding physical development are maturation and a critical period. Maturation is the automatic and sequential process of development, and it results from genetic signals. So, for example, most infants crawl and then walk, and it happens automatically. It's not something that you have to really do anything about. Critical period is a time in our development when you're more suited to learn a particular skill or behavior pattern. We'll be watching a documentary about a young lady who was denied her ability to learn language during a critical period. Very famous case study. So when we're talking about the physical development of infants and children, it's important to know what we're talking about. Infancy is the period from birth to about the age of 2, and childhood is the period from about the age of 2 until adolescence. So that is a very long period of time. And typically what we see is very predictable. During the period of infancy, height and weight increases very rapidly, although not as fast as before birth. And the muscles and the nervous system soon develop, allowing babies to crawl, walk, and generally act with more purpose. So they're doing things, they're trying to do things, and they're accomplishing it rather than just kind of lying there passively. Reflexes are a part of physical development of infants, and actually many of the reflexes that we're going to be talking about start during the prenatal development. They are involuntary reactions or responses like swallowing. What are some other reflexes? Well, we have a grasping reflex. So if you've ever been around a newborn or a very young infant and you put your finger in their hand, they're going to grasp it, and that is a very well-known documented reflex. There is a Babinski reflex, and that is where if you, and I'm going to pretend this is a foot, if you stroke a baby's foot kind of like that, their toes are going to spread out. I encourage you to try that the next time you're around a baby. They have a Moro reflex or a startle reflex. That's where if they're startled, they throw their arms and legs kind of out like that. And you kind of see a picture of that down below. Also have reflexes that are designed to keep the baby alive. So you've got the rooting reflex. If you stroke a baby's cheek, they typically are going to turn their head in order to find sustenance. They're going to try to find a source of food. They're going to suckle or swallow automatically. That's not something that they have to learn. And then you have body functions like waste elimination. A baby pooping and peeing does not have to be taught to do those things. Some of these reflexes either go away or they come under conscious control. Some last a lifetime, however, such as breathing, sneezing, coughing, yawning, and blinking. Some of these have physiological purposes that we know about, and some of them we still are really just kind of hypothesizing about. So continuing along the line of physical development of infants and children, we have motor development, and this is how a baby learns how to move around kind of in a predictable sequence. They begin to develop more purposeful movement, so they're trying to do something and they're accomplishing it. And you have two kinds of motor development. You have gross motor development and fine motor development. Gross motor development is the coordination of major muscle groups, arms, legs, and trunk. So they're the big movements that babies do. And then you have fine motor development, and this is coordination of hands, face, and other smaller muscles. And they do happen simultaneously, although typically the gross motor development skills do come around a little bit faster. It's important to remember that development does vary between infants and cultures. So what we see here in the United States is very different than what you might come across in different countries as far as how babies develop. Another aspect of physical development of infants is perceptual development. And this is the process where infants learn to make sense of sights, sounds, tastes, and other sensations. One thing that we do know is that when we study infants and we look at the different indicators and whether they're interested or not, they do tend to prefer novel stimuli. And somewhere between 15 and 20 weeks, babies prefer faces. They're drawn to something that looks like a face. So you have a picture here on your screen of some paddles where researchers will make the paddle look more or less like a face. The paddle that looks more like a face with the two squares on top to resemble eyes and the one square on the bottom to resemble a mouth tend to attract the gaze of babies for much, much longer. It is a statistical significance. So we know that they're more interested in items, even if they're not faces. If they resemble faces, babies look at them longer. There have also been studies done on babies' preferences to taste. It would appear that babies like sweet versus bitter or sour taste. They will actually make faces and, really just not enjoy it. And last on this page is the visual cliff. You see a picture down in your right-hand corner. This is where a baby at a certain developmental age will not crawl over what appears to be a cliff, even if the caregiver that they're most used to is on the other side trying to convince them that it's okay and to crawl over it. Now, early in the development, as the baby is first learning how to crawl, they will crawl over that visual cliff because they don't have the experience yet to foresee a drop-off or what they perceive could be a potential threat of a drop-off. This change in behavior is very indicative that there is a developmental maturation in play. Okay, so let's review. In this video, we talked about the biological factors in lifespan development, including the role of the brain. We talked about that continuing influence of nature versus nurture. We talked about how we study development. We discussed prenatal development, including influences on prenatal development. And we talked about the physical, motor, and perceptual development of infants and the physical, motor, and cognitive development of children. In our next video, we'll be discussing the cognitive, moral, and social development theories in psychology. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.